tall grass swaying along the hillside, ocean waves crashing against pristine shorelines, seabirds sinking down out of cerulean blue skies. Would would you believe me if I told you I was describing a nuclear power plant? In today's episode of Naked Nuclear, we're discussing what happens when energy decisions are made with 7 generations in mind.
Scott Lathrop, my boss, he talks a lot about 7 generation decision making. The way he makes decisions is that he thinks 7 generations in the future and what would be the right decision for these children and the children of the world.
That's Ryan Pickering from the Tribal Consent-Based Coalition. We actually recorded this episode on Native American Heritage Day and discussed how Indigenous Ethos is directing nuclear energy to build trust, heal the past, and ensure a cleaner, more sustainable future.
My boss certainly loves the idea of like finding efficiencies and using what he calls using the whole deer. So he wrote a letter to the NRC saying like, we're not using the whole deer here. Listen to these guys at DISA, grant them their licenses, and we will provide tribal oversight to that.
Ryan was born and raised in California, but he's not a native Californian. He doesn't have Indigenous roots, so how did he get involved with the Tribal Consent-Based Coalition?
I'm surprised to be here with you today. My career has spanned a lot of aspects of energy, and I'm so grateful to be working for a tribal consent-based coalition. I've always been fascinated by energy. My dad is an engineer, and he did a lot of experiments with little steam turbines creating electricity for science fair. And when solar came out, I'm 37 years old. When solar came out, 20 years ago, I thought it really just clicked. And so I started building solar power systems when I was 20 years old, and I did it until I was 35 and loved it. It really, I'm here in California. We had a lot of incentives to make solar happen. And so I built 7,300 rooftop solar power systems in my career. Along with my crews, I continued to study how all these energy sources interact with each other to keep the the, the grid online, and also just beyond electricity, our industrial heating needs, our transportation and fuel needs. All of that kind of led me back to nuclear because I think it's the hardest challenge right now. And I saw nuclear as a place that could really use my assistance. And it was through that transition that I met some of the tribal members that I work with today.
One doesn't simply just transition into nuclear. So, where did Ryan start?
I got my start in nuclear because our nuclear plant in California was at risk of closing. It's called Diablo Canyon Power Plant. And about 5 years ago, a movement started to keep the plant online. It was supposed to close this year. We just recognized that our energy grid wasn't in a place to survive without Diablo. It's the largest generator on our grid. So it provides this kind of like baseload inertia. It sets the tone for the whole California grid. They were like, oh, yeah, don't worry about it. We'll replace it with renewables. And I was like, well, that's like treading water. And then the deeper we looked, it became clear that we were actually going to have to increase capacity at our natural gas plants. We started trying to understand why they were closing the plant because it's one of the youngest nuclear power plants in the US, and it's in excellent operating condition, has all these records and excellent staff. And it turned out that, it was more of like a politically, sociologically motivated action than like something rooted in physics. We ultimately saved the plant, got it extended for 5 years, and the NRC is looking to relicense it for 20 years. So and we know it can run for at least 40 more years. So, I expect California to continue to be nuclear powered. But in that process, early on, trying to save the plant, I had this thought like, hey, someone should reach out to the local tribe here. Who is that? And everyone go, yeah, do the research. Research on tribes is challenging because it's never cut and dry. It's never like fits into the box you think it's going to fit into. So I reached out to a couple tribes in the region, and I was able to ascertain who really had the claim on the land around Diablo Canyon Power Plant. And that's how I found titʻu, tiłhini, Northern Chumash tribe in the San Luis Obispo region. And I met one of their tribal elders named Scott Lathrop. And we had coffee a few years ago. He was like, you guys are going to save the plant, aren't you? And we were like, We're gonna try. He's like, oh, you're gonna. That was Isabel Bemeke from Save Clean Energy, Isodope, and Heather Hoff from Mothers for Nuclear. He's like, okay, well, we should work together. We should compare notes. And we were like, what's your interest in the land? And he was like, well, it turned out that the tribe lived there for 12,000 years. One of their ancestral village sites is a stone's throw from Diablo Canyon. It's not just their region, it's very specific where Diablo is 4 of their 6 village sites. And it was just fascinating to learn this history. And I learned that people from the tribe who go by tiłhini for short, which means full moon, the people of the full moon is their tribal name. Titʻu, tiłhini, the people of the full moon. So Tiłhini was their capital city, and it's the name of their language, and they just go by tiłhini for short, full moon. They helped build the plant 50 years ago. Scott Lathrop was an inspector early in his career, so he inspected it during construction.
Let's recap. Ryan is advocating to save Diablo Canyon power plant. And along the way, he decides to reach out to whatever indigenous tribe lays claim to the land, which happens to be the YTT tribe. From there, he learns about the rich history of the tribe and even tribal members such as Scott Lathrop being on site during the construction. But did the tribe have a say during this early construction period?
While it is his homeland and the tribe did not grant consent to the construction project, that was a long time ago, they do want a land stewardship deal, and they're working with the local utility to administer that. And so the tribe does things like prescribed burns in California. I've seen some of these tribal-led burns in San Luis Obispo, and they're actually very small areas. They pick like very specific kind of hillside areas that aren't grazed naturally or old logs, and they'll just burn a 10-yard by 10-yard space. They'll have tribal members there and being involved with some of the biologists who work on the site. That's how I met the tribe. There are 54 members in the tribe, and they're not a federally recognized tribe, which, matters in some pieces of paperwork. But they do have an ancient history that's well documented with the Smithsonian, and they have their own language. And I was just totally blown away as a Californian to work with Native California people. There are over 600 federally recognized tribes and 200 more non-recognized tribes just in the US. So it's a huge, huge diversity, but a lot of them have like mineral and mining history. The one thing that comes up almost always is the history of uranium mining on Navajo land, as well as uranium mining on about 5 other tribes' lands that occurred in the 40s for uranium for bombs. That is not a very well-known history in the US, but it's very well known with tribal groups. Some say it was the most deadly nuclear incident in the United States, other than the bombs being dropped in Japan. Hundreds of Navajo miners died prematurely because of inhalation of radon. Much of it was unsafe mining practices that were allowed by the wildcat miners that were selling uranium to the federal government. We hear stories about men were eating their lunches down in the mines. There were pits and they weren't ventilated very well. They were just inhaling a ton of radon. Another deep tragedy of the history of uranium mining on Navajo land is they had the uranium tailings. They had sorted through them, just kind of rubble outside of the mine. And some communities use that as the foundation of some of their buildings in their communities. That was all done 70 years ago. So most of those buildings had to be destroyed and rebuilt. And there was a federal act called RECA, RECA, that awarded over $1 billion to these uranium mining families, but a lot of people were left out. It was kind of like, here, take this money and jump through all these hoops for it. And so it didn't bring reconciliation. We are still reaching out to these affected tribes, especially we call them Navajo, or, their name is Diné. They are the largest tribe in the United States. And there are many tribes inside of Diné that have been kind of grouped together, and they also have the largest reservation. That is why, in addition to our TCBC program, we've gotten into activism, because these uranium mines, especially on Navajo land, are not remediated. We just walked away from them 50 years ago. And so that is all to say that we want to clean these minds up, because until we're there, I just see this from a Native American perspective as unfinished business.
The early beginnings and history of nuclear technology and uranium mining is not always a pretty one. It often involves morally bankrupt use cases. And as we're making this push to triple nuclear energy, it is imperative that we remember these stories and pave the way for new ones.
When there was an opportunity to apply to the Department of Energy's consent-based siting program, I brought it to the tribe's attention. Through our network of nuclear advocacy, we connected with Dr. Robert Hayes from North Carolina State University. He leads a nuclear engineering undergrad program there, has an amazing lab on campus. He said he was interested in applying and kind of had an idea for a study. He invited YTT Tribe and Mothers for Nuclear, a pro-nuclear group based in San Luis Obispo and friends with the tribe, to both be co-applicants. And a year and a half ago, we won. We are one of 11 consortium members, and it's our job to have this community consent dialogue and a 12-year program to move nuclear around to consolidated interim sites, nuclear fuel. And so we're just at the beginning. We're a year in. We have a 2-year mandate to have these public conversations, and then we're going to probably apply for a 3rd year to continue some of the conversations we're having.
Moving nuclear fuel around to consolidated interim sites? Yeah, that's not a sentence you hear every day. So, what does that mean and what does it look like?
Well, I think we should go back to the Nuclear Waste Policy Act. It's a federal law, but it's a place that lays out what we can do with nuclear waste. Now, I will say in our group, we try not to say nuclear waste because we don't really think it's a great name. It has fear implications. The Department of Energy often says spent nuclear fuel, SNF. We also see used nuclear fuel, UNF. Our group often just says nuclear fuel. The Nuclear Waste Policy Act talks about a deep geological repository and lays out Yucca Mountain, which was dug and many billions of dollars were spent on it. We never populated it, so it's a big hole in the ground, but it doesn't have like the radiating chambers to put the fuel in. It was met with a lot of tribal resistance. The whole way that Yucca Mountain was rolled out is a case study of like how not to do anything. Top down federal decision that we're going to put it here. So of course, just like so much land in the US, this was sacred tribal land, and the 2 tribes in the region said immediately no. And this was also in a state that we did a lot of nuclear testing, and there was nuclear weapons testing. So there was like a lot of unaddressed ick about that. And consent-based siting is the opposite way of doing it. It's like literally just flip that over. The Nuclear Waste Policy Act also talks about consent-based siting. So we're kind of activating this new approach. And the consent-based siting approach, the Department of Energy said, hey, here's a $2 million grant for 12 different groups. So $24 million. And I think they ended up only doing 11 groups. So $22 million, huge amount of money, enormous amount of taxpayer money. And we take that very seriously. So our group was awarded $2 million. A lot of that goes to NC State because they have much higher costs and it has to go through the department and everything. And then they allocate some of those funds to Mothers for Nuclear and Tribal Consent-Based Coalition, which is an organization that we formed outside of the tribe. The tribe originally applied, but they said that they would spin out a different organization to manage that grant. And then that's what we've done with Tribal Consent-Based Coalition. And it is much larger than any single tribe. We want to talk to all Native people in the US and non-Native people, but bringing this perspective of, hey, figure out whose land it is and create new relations and see where that goes.
So, what does it look like and what does it mean to be a part of this consortia?
I can only speak for our consortia. though we do meet quarterly with all consortium members and hear updates about them. And we just had that last week. With our proposal, we said, hey, we're going to do a road show. We're going to find cities, capitals, places that are interested in engaging with this subject, pro or anti, or whatever, and bring everyone together for the day, provide breakfast and lunch, provide like a neutral space, like a rented library or a chamber of the state capitol or a university, and bring people together, poll the audience first, have them sit down, have them take breakfast, and then take a survey on where they're at with nuclear, maybe 14 questions. And then we begin and we provide 3 different presentations to the audience. First from Tribal Consent-Based Coalition, and my boss, Scott Lathrop, presents most of that and presents his, perspective on nuclear. And then we do a small Q&A, and then moves to Mothers for Nuclear, and they provide a perspective. A lot of the founders of Mothers for Nuclear work in the nuclear industry, and they're mothers, and they're trying to thread that needle. And then Dr. Hayes presents and has a pretty academic take on nuclear fuel, where it comes from, what are millisieverts, what are radiation doses, while still trying to root it in a public presentation, which is challenging. Dr. Hayes does a pretty good job of educating the audience. He's a great educator. And then Q&A, and then we survey the audience again and see what changed. We're not trying to convince the audience, that's one of the challenges, is we try not to be too booster. We just try to kind of say our perspective. But the thesis certainly is that education overcomes fear. And hopefully something like this would benefit a community that was looking into new nuclear infrastructure, whether that's consolidated storage or fuel manufacturing or enrichment or even mining, also new nuclear plants or transmission lines. How do we get community buy-in and see this as an asset so that we work with communities long-term?
I've hosted a handful of community and public outreach events during my life, and I think the hardest thing is getting people to actually show up. So I asked Ryan, how do they ensure that people are going to show up to these events?
We do a lot of outreach for it. We advertise on Reddit and Facebook, and we do a bunch of phone and email outreach, especially to legislators. We always try to invite legislators, tribal groups, faith leaders, local environmentalist groups, and NGOs. And then my role is to lean in extra with tribal groups. And sometimes the tribal group are like, we're not going to come on a Saturday to meet you on your turf, but if you want to get there early, like on Friday, we can meet on our turf. And so Scott and I often fly out early and have those conversations. There's a couple nuclear nerds who will hear about it and they just come. A lot of them work in nuclear. And then I would say the knowledge drops off pretty precipitously. Nuclear is a massively difficult thing to understand. So the politicians and the environmentalists, they generally have some stuff. It's mostly what they've heard about nuclear, a lot of the negative stuff. And then tribal people have pretty good knowledge. It depends, of course. There are over 600 federally recognized tribes and 200 more non-recognized tribes just in the US. But a lot of them have mineral and mining history, power plant history. A lot of them are building solar microgrids right now and wind farms. They're pretty well versed. But one thing that comes up almost always with tribal groups is the history of uranium mining on Navajo land. It's one of the first slides. We have a PowerPoint presentation that Scott presents, and there are about 3 slides of 10 that are on this matter. It's intense to talk about, and it really emotionally charges our workshop a little bit. And I'm glad that our group wants Native people to start and kind of set the tone.
It's well and good to have buy-in from the community, but what about private industry?
So we've been writing to the NRC about the importance of this, and we've been building coalition around that. And I'm glad to say that private industry is really listening. There's this interesting dynamic because there's quite a bit of uranium left on Navajo land. And now that nuclear is the future of America, and everyone seems to agree on that all of a sudden, we need more domestic uranium supply. And so a company like DISA is building this that you put those tailings in and they blast it with water and it disassociates the uranium from everything else. And you can mine and somewhat mill the uranium right on site and remediate them. And then the real fill that has no uranium left in it back in the mine, we can close it and we can close these mines appropriately and profitably, which sounds like you, but right now the plan is that we're going to box it up and send it to Texas or something. All these like non-solutions. And my boss certainly loves the idea of like finding efficiencies and using what he calls using the whole deer. When he was taught to hunt by his grandfather, they would hunt deer and they would use everything. And he's like, we're not using the whole deer here. So he wrote a letter to the NRC saying like, hey, you should listen to these guys at DISA and like grant them their licenses so they can start getting to work. And we will provide tribal oversight to that. And he's like, the fact that they make money, so they have an incentive to fix these mines, that sounds good. And we will monitor that, you know. He also wants to redefine, and I think this is really important, is sometimes we get critiqued by the nuclear industry themselves, some really cowardly stuff saying, hey, don't talk to Native American people. They're just going to slow everything down. They're just going to want money. And that's like ill-informed at best, like racist at worst. What I love about my boss is he's like, no, people don't understand. If you come to us first, it's actually going to go better. It's going to go way smoother and you're not going to lose sleep at night because you're stealing people's land. So you're going to get blessed that way. And then it's going to go faster because we're going to tell you like who you actually need to talk to because you're not from around here. And we know our elected officials and we can just say, hey, go and talk to this person, this person, this person. And it's going to be cheaper. They're actually going to save money and they won't get sued. And like, it's actually more expensive to ignore the tribes. We try to carry that forward every day at TCBC. We're not just some like native tax that you have to pay. We are an ally and a very important ally that you can partner with by reaching out to us first, because it's trust building exercises. And it's not, hey, come in here with a deal and we'll sign it day one. My boss told me, he's like, hey, when we ride along and meet with tribes, do not propose the deal. You're lucky to be here and you can sit quietly and you can contribute. The one thing that I don't want to hear from you is like, hey, let's do a deal, because that is in poor taste for so many reasons. And that Native people, and I think everyone to a certain extent, we have to have that trust building exercise for big things. We need to get to know each other. And that includes storytelling and history and things that seem far, far out of the scope of what we're doing. I've learned to embrace that because like knowing where you're from and the stories that are important to you, it's all so relevant. And it's about mutual respect and just a more patient way of coming together. And I think it's just applicable to everything. And Scott Lathrop, my boss, he talks a lot about 7-generation decision making. The way he makes decisions is that he thinks 7 generations in the future and what would be the right decision for his children and the children of the world. YTT tribe, they lost a lot of their traditional knowledge. About 90% of the US population, or the North American population of indigenous people, died relatively quickly after contact because of measles and smallpox. But a lot of things survive in the oral tradition and even written tradition. One thing that's survived in YTT tribe is this appreciation for the 3 realms: land, sky, and water. Land is this feminine, sky is this masculine, and water is like the blood of the earth. And when you make decisions, you're mindful of those 3 realms and its impact on those 3 things. And that's why the tribe, some members of the tribe are attracted to nuclear energy, because it has the least impact on the 3 realms. And they've studied it in depth. Diablo's a great example. They don't have cooling towers at Diablo Canyon power plant. They have once through cooling with the ocean, something that environmentalists just despised. How it would cook the local wildlife, but really, the ocean off the coast of Diablo is one of the most important ecosystems in California. It's incredibly diverse, and the slightly warmer water has only, boosted this cove that's there, and it's an incredible whale nursery. There's these unbelievable whale migrations, and some of the baby whales will come into the marina of Diablo and swim around. The tribe has been studying this the whole time, and they have all these native species like this rare frog in the area. And as far as sky, there's no emissions, there's no smokestack anywhere there. And the land is doing so well, and the tribe wants to share these observations, this native science with the world.
When I think of a nuclear power plant, I think of giant concrete cooling towers, lots of industrialized beige and steel construction, lots of metal everywhere. Don't think about beautiful land. And so I was surprised to hear about what the land looked like around Diablo Canyon.
The land is very beautiful. I've got it pinned to my Twitter account. They let me bring my camera in last time I was there and take some landscape photos. Everyone's seen like the pictures of the plant and everything. I want to see the grasses. I want to see the birds and the wildflower blooms and the seasons. All nuclear plants have this in common. They have these exclusion zones around them that become natural sanctuaries. I really like reframing. It's not a nuclear plant. It's at worst a clean energy center, at best a nature sanctuary. I think Scott talks about this well. He's like, Diablo is an asset. It's a human-made asset. It is an asset that is aligned with nature and allows us to lower our impact on nature. Because in this tiny little footprint, we power 10% of California. And what does that save us? With just a pickup truck full of uranium. It's comical how efficient it is, and that we should protect nuclear plants like we do ecosystems. We should combine those things and into a larger-led stewardship effort. This goes back to Scott Lathrop saying that knowledge conquers fear. I think there's a larger movement going on in the US and around the world about energy realism. It's the antidote for energy blindness. We are afflicted by energy blindness right now, and that's okay. It's difficult to comprehend how manufactured our space is and where all this energy comes from. The antidote is energy realism, and it comes in so many different ways. I think I would love to see it integrated more into our curriculums and into our discussions. And I think it's coming. It started with Germany closing their nuclear plants, and now they're having to turn on coal plants and import more energy from other countries. And it's, whoa, that's energy realism. And energy realism will really improve our decision-making process. And so will this 7-generation decision-making that some of our tribal leaders are trying to teach us.
So the land around these nuclear power plants is beautiful, and we're working towards energy realism. But one of the realities within this conversation is, what does it look like to store nuclear fuel?
We're going to put those canisters on trucks from the nuclear plants where they all are currently. And then we're going to put them on this beautiful rail car called Atlas. And then we're going to move it. And we're just going to put the nuclear fuel canisters right on top of that parking lot, an engineered parking lot, hopefully with tribal consent the whole way. That's my dream. And I want to have like parades around it. I want like tribal leaders move it and show some competency here. I want to be clear. There is nothing wrong with where they're at today from a health standpoint. How the Nuclear Waste Policy Act is written is it's the law that we do have to move it. So let's do it. And let's win some awards. I have a feeling there will be many consolidated sites. I don't think it's going to be one. Could be two. It's just a parking lot.
So the process of storing nuclear fuel is actually kind of boring. So I wanted to ask Ryan, what else does the nuclear industry need in order to get community buy-in and expand nuclear power?
I think in order to really move forward with confidence, we need to see the many nuclear sites that we have today in communities that really like their nuclear plant, and often tribes who like the plant. I'd like to see them expand because a lot of them were designed for multiple reactors. And I would like to see us take a fleet scale approach and build. When I talk to the Department of Energy about hey, how are we doing on 200 gigawatts? They're like, we think the announcements for new plants are going to come, but we need to hire 425,000 people into nuclear by 2050. That's what we're concerned about. Who knows about that? Well, first of all, I don't think anyone really does. That's My first observation of the nuclear is like we've just kind of been protecting our old plants that we love and are still good for many, many more years. But since we've been building so slowly, there's a calcification. So I really try to encourage entrepreneurs to think about nuclear. We also need a broader industry around the core of nuclear that's, I think, more entrepreneurial, and no one really knows what that looks like. We're talking about selling nuclear service contracts to businesses who want to source 24/7 clean energy. Who's going to connect the dots from the nuclear plant to the factory who signed a 24/7 clean energy pledge? The definition of entrepreneurship is, in French, is to be between things. Find gaps in the nuclear space and see if there's anyone there. And if there's not, that's an entrepreneurship opportunity. Of course, like nuclear engineering and the trades, great welders, great concrete teams are amazing these days. These are the highest, most skilled tradespeople, and we need those. So if you want to study the trades, there's just a huge opportunity. And if there's not a nuclear plant under construction that day, you can go take those skills and do skyscrapers and all kinds of other very high paid jobs. So skilled trades, awesome. Nuclear jobs, awesome. We can build it here and regulate it in an incredible way and lower our impact on Earth immediately. And we can do it with tribal consent, and we can do it with supporting communities. And it doesn't have to be this like dirty first gen industrialization that we learned about in school. This industrialization, you're going to want to be close to this infrastructure in the future. It's going to be, yes, in my backyard. I want nuclear. I want advanced industry in my town because it brings human flourishing that all of us get to enjoy together.
Now it's time for some of our rapid fire questions. So for you, first question, other hobbies that you have when you're not, trying to save the planet?
I love to skateboard, and I'm still doing it at my ripe old age. I love to snowboard. I love backpacking and finding some amazing places to get into, especially if there's a hot spring involved.
We talked previously, said you lived in a yurt. Would you ever consider living in a yurt again?
Yeah, I had a pretty crunchy phase of my life in my 20s. I was really into like backyard gardening and super decentralized energy. By the way, I was anti-nuclear at that time, and I've evolved my perspective on that. Yurts are cute and they're very small. I lived alone, so I'd like to have a family someday, and I can't really imagine like having to look at my whole family all the time in our one circular room.
Last question. Do you have any like top go-to stories from Scott or working with TCBC that you're just like, this is the story that I want to tell with other people?
Yeah, I really recommend this PBS special that was just filmed by the tribe. So I would start there. And then the tribe is certainly preparing to be a bit more public. With all tribes, capacity is something to consider. That's one of the challenges when reaching out to tribes. It's like, hey, I want your time. And they're like, so does everyone else. At the same time, the tribe is seeing an opportunity in this moment to be more pronounced in what they're looking to bring to the world and what they're asking from the world. So you can get that from their website, yttnorthernchumash.org.
And Ryan's advice for people seeking to go into nuclear?
Seek mentorship, because the people in the nuclear industry know that we need to pass on this knowledge and innovate. And I encourage networking as well through the conventional ways of ANS, and also just like get on LinkedIn and just start connecting with people. Get on Instagram and connect with Isabel Bemeke and Isodope and all the Generation Atomic and all these, like, get in the game. And you can certainly reach out to me on LinkedIn and connect with me there, and do my best to start that networking process.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode. Again, we filmed this on Native American Heritage Day. I thought it was really important to be able to tell the narratives, tell the stories around the YTT tribe, around uranium mining, land stewardship, land ownership, and how we can actually pave the way for the future in the way that we do energy. And understanding if we move forward with nuclear energy, we should be thinking 7 generations ahead to respect the land, to respect ourselves, and to respect future communities. I want to thank TCBC, the YTT Northern Chumash tribe, and Ryan Pickering for being able to make this episode come to life. for future episodes, I'm excited to be talking about Mothers for Nuclear, ethics of nuclear energy and the economy, as well as nuclear programs being developed by the American Nuclear Society. I'm your host, Danielle, and thank you for listening to Naked Nuclear. Stay curious.